The prophet Habakkuk was a man of prayer. He lived in what were difficult times for the Old Testament Church of God, difficult times that drew out from his heart the cry that we find in chapter 3 of his prophecy and verse 2. Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, O Lord. Renew them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. There are three main things, I think, that we can find in this verse. First of all, Habakkuk recalls the mighty works of God in times past. I have heard of your fame, he says, referring to the reports of the mighty acts of God down through the centuries of the Old Testament people of God. I stand in awe of your deeds. And these deeds, these mighty works of God would, of course, have included that central saving event at the heart of the Old Testament, the exodus of God's people from Egypt. But secondly, notice how the act of remembering these mighty works of God is used here immediately to fuel, as it were, Habakkuk's petition to the Lord to renew and revive these mighty works. Renew them in our day, in our time, he says, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. And should something of that not be our prayer, the cry of the whole church in all its parts in these days of difficulty in our own nation? Let's remember the great movements of God's power in times past, going as far back as the days of Ninian, Patrick and Columba, thinking of the great movement of the Reformation in Scotland and the Covenanting times, to say nothing of the periods of great spiritual renewal and quickening, awakening and revival that touched almost every corner of our land. Such remembering can help us to have confidence in our God, to strengthen our longing to see God working in that kind of way once again, so that we take up something of the verdant cry of Habakkuk here. Revive your work, O Lord, renew them in our day. But thirdly, notice the foundation on which Habakkuk's prayer is based. It's simply on the mercy, on the compassion of God. In wrath, he says, remember mercy. Now, the word that's actually translated wrath here is not one of the normal words that's used in the Old Testament for the wrath of God. It is, in fact, a word that describes rather the agitation, the turmoil, the disturbance that is experienced by a society that, albeit under the judgment of God, under his wrath, experiences that judgment. The root idea behind the word is simply that of physical shaking, but here it's used as a metaphor for every kind of shaking that God's ancient people were experiencing or about to experience under the approaching threat of the Babylonian armies. Physical shaking, psychological, social, economic, spiritual, moral, and other types of shaking as well. Habakkuk prays in the midst of all of that, Lord, in the tumultuous shaking that we are presently experiencing, remember to be merciful. In other words, he's saying, Lord, don't treat us as your justice demands, don't treat us as our sins deserve, but treat us as your mercy finds us, hopeless, helpless, lost, defiled. Treat us also as your grace has made provision for us, we might say today, so richly in the Lord Jesus Christ. Habakkuk is simply asking God to be consistent with his moral character, for he is still today, as he has always been and will always be, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Should we not as a church then throw ourselves on the mercy and compassion of our God in these days? Surely we have no other plea. Renew them in our day, in our time make them known. In wrath, remember mercy.